In the scriptures, we are given two versions of the Ten Commandments, the first in Exodus 20 and the second in Deuteronomy 5. This morning we'll be reading from Exodus 20, and I would like to invite you all to open your pew Bibles to page 65, and let us read the Ten Commandments out loud together. Exodus chapter 20, beginning at the first verse. Then God spoke all these words, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents, to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox, or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This is the word of the Lord. Anyone who has dipped even the smallest toe into the pool of modern physics will know that time is about far more than the ticking of the clock. The physicists speak of the space-time continuum and the bending of time through the influence of gravity and velocity. Well, down here among us folks, we may measure time by the hours, the minutes, the days, the centuries, the eons, but at the bottom we all know that time is a deep mystery. In a lecture entitled Space and Time Warps, Stephen Hawking asked a theoretical question. How fast would a person have to go in order to be observed by another person as traveling backwards in time? Hawking answers his own question with a limerick. There was a young lady of white who traveled much faster than light. She departed one day in a relative way and arrived on the previous night. Well, okay, a little bit of humor helps us understand the mystery of time. Okay, but closer to home, here we go with our experience of time. Sometimes we wonder, where is all the time gone? Where was yesterday? What will tomorrow bring? Is this moment all we have? Is all time the same? Do our lives as lived through time have any meaning? You know, the Greeks had a way of speaking about the special moments of time that stood out from all the rest. They spoke of these as kairos moments, moments that are pregnant with meaning and significance, in contrast to the chronos, the ticking of the clock that divides all time into equal parts. The Hebrews had another way of speaking about the rhythm and the meaning of time: Sabbath time. Sabbath is not just any time. Sabbath time is that time that makes all time holy, inviting us into life within God's time. I suspect that most of us could share some childhood memory of how the Sabbath was kept or remembered in your home. Most of those memories are happy ones and have been lost to this modern, over-programmed, data-bombarded, hyper-stimulated time in which we live. We've kind of flattened time and made all time the same. Sometimes memories from our childhood remind us of tedium and boredom when you couldn't do a whole list of things and movie theaters were closed and there were no sports on Sunday and all the shops were shut up tight. Whatever we remember, we all have the same struggle, and that is to keep the Sabbath time as God intends. On one extreme, Christians have often fallen into a kind of deadly legalism that crushes the spirit and robs this day of the opportunity for joy. And on the other extreme, we live as though Sunday is just simply an extra day to catch up on all that stuff we didn't finish last week or get a jump start on the week ahead, to gain control of the world and the people around us, or maybe just to indulge our gratuitous pleasures. Well, what have we done with God's most precious gift of time, this Sabbath day? I think we need to clear away our fixed ideas and hear what the Scriptures say about this holy time. I mentioned that there are two versions of the Ten Commandments given to us in Scripture. The first version in the book of Exodus says that the Sabbath day is a day of holy rest. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the Sabbath day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. And so in Exodus we hear that the reason for keeping the Sabbath is to enter into the rhythm of God's work in creation. God rested on the seventh day, and so the Sabbath becomes a day of rest for us. God rested not because God was tired, but because God wanted us to recognize the difference between the Creator and the creation. In other words, it's stepping back for a moment, pausing in the midst of the times of our lives to contemplate the mystery of God and to understand that God is beyond and above all things. And there's more to God than we can know and see in the work of God's hands. The same way, we're invited to reflect that truth in the rhythm of our own lives. I don't know about you, but often at a party I find myself asking a person, usually the second question, well, tell me what you do. As if somehow knowing what that person does is going to give me the essence of that person's life. We are more than what we do. And Sabbath rest reminds us that our lives have meaning apart from what we accomplish with our minds or with our hands. Life has intrinsic value because God created life and simply declared it good. We rest from our labors, to have breathing room for God so that God may labor in us. Jan Lachman, in his book on the Ten Commandments, Signpost to Freedom, says, the fourth commandment prevents us from absolutizing our achievements. Isn't that always a temptation to us? To think that the work we do with our hands is the most important, the only enduring thing there is. And when we do not keep the Sabbath, we do not give God the time to work in our lives. This coming Saturday will be a day of Sabbath rest for those who participate in a workshop on listening for God. Silence is the first language of God. A workshop on centering prayer, a time to set aside all the rush and the busyness of life and to gather together to deepen the life of prayer and thus enter into God's time. In writing about the Sabbath, the Jewish scholar Abraham Joshua Herschel said, "To gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. The danger begins when, in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. For there is a realm of time in which the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong," Herschel writes, "when the control of space, the acquisition of the things of space become our sole concern." Herschel is right. Life goes right when we enter and live into the Sabbath rest of God. Exodus speaks of rest. Deuteronomy speaks of keeping the Sabbath to remember that once we were slaves in Egypt and the Lord our God brought us out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. The Sabbath is the day that we remember and we celebrate our freedom. We cease from our labors to simply rejoice in gratitude to God for the freedom that God has won for us from our captivity to sin, from the burdens that weigh heavy upon us. Sometimes the oppression we know is not so much physical as it is emotional or spiritual. Sometimes the oppression we know is not what others have inflicted on us, but what we inflict on ourselves. And it is God who sets us free from our illusions, our failings, our obsessions, and delivers us from our bondage to sin. It's God in this Sabbath rest who takes away our despair and renews our hope. God who leads us from self-destructive paths into a new path in life. You know, sometimes we feel oppressed by time itself. We sit around and we stew about our regrets over time past, our anxiety about the present time, our feelings of despair about the ever-shrinking future. Sabbath rest sets us free from the bondage of the ticking of the clock. It allows us to experience not only this day, but all days as days held within the grace of God's time. We celebrate the gift of Sabbath, the freedom of the Sabbath, not by letting this day become an impossible burden, by welcoming it as a day to enhance life. You know, through the centuries, Jews and Christians made many laws and had many traditions to define how the Sabbath could be used, what was allowed, what was forbidden. Through the centuries, such things were outlawed as Sunday dancing, shopping, drinking, cockfighting even. I guess you could do it other days of the week. Movie going, card playing, funny paper reading, or what have you. All intended to be a good way, a good reminder of how to keep the Sabbath. But the problem is a list of don'ts never encourages abundant life. Keeping the Sabbath is not so much about forbidding certain activities as it is encouraging the positive. This is a day for joyful celebration and grateful freedom. This is a day for corporate worship, for studying the Bible, for being with family and friends, for taking a walk and simply being in awe of the created world, of doing acts of kindness and compassion, sharing our faith. We as a people have so many choices before us, it is difficult to exercise our freedom in responsible ways. But when we do not take the time to rest, we lose our essential spiritual, emotional, and physical health and balance. I think each one of us could tell a tale, I suspect, of what happens when we do not take the time to be renewed, restored. We think that by being a workaholic, we're going to accomplish more. But by working so much, overworking, we begin to believe that we really are the ones who are in control of the small space in which we move and have our being. We lose our strength, our perspective, and perhaps worst of all, our sense of humor. I may have told you before about our first year in ministry. We were as green could be. We worked night and day. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, but we tried to do it anyway. And I remember it was a long Holy Week, and we finally had the climax of Easter Sunday and all of the special services that week and everything else that was going on and the hyped up expectations. And then a group of about 6 of us who have all left seminary together and served churches in rural eastern North Carolina were going to play golf that Easter Monday. I tell you, it was a beautiful day, a glorious day. And people were together and they were telling jokes and having a good time and playing golf, enjoying the wonder of God's nature. And I was absolutely miserable. There wasn't one thing funny about those stupid jokes they told. There wasn't one good thing about being out in the sunshine. There wasn't one good thing about playing golf that day. Because I had been working like the devil, and the devil I'd become. From time to time, all of us are capable of rising to the occasion, hitting an extra lick, going the extra mile. But if we think we can do that all the time, if we think we're the exception to the rule, that we can work and work and work, it just shows how deluded, self-deluded we actually are. And when we try to do that, we become spiritually, emotionally, and physically sick. It's Jesus who understands the whole idea of the Sabbath and Sabbath rest and Sabbath freedom. Jesus knew that the Sabbath was God's good gift for a human life. On the Sabbath, his hungry disciples were passing through the grain fields, and they plucked the heads of the grain and they threshed them within their fingers, and they began to eat them. And the Pharisees saw them and accused them of doing what was unlawful on the Sabbath. What was unlawful about that? Well, plucking and threshing is work that is not permitted on the Sabbath. He and his friends were using the Sabbath to restore life, to provide for life, to feed hungry people. And the terrible irony of the story is that the Pharisees, on a day when Jesus is healing a man with a withered hand in the synagogue on the Sabbath, the Pharisees who thought he ought to wait for an ordinary day to do such a thing and not the Sabbath. The irony is that the Pharisees take that very same day, that very same time, and plot the death of the one who said, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. How do we keep the Sabbath? What if we were to become a community of those who follow Jesus and keep the Sabbath as God intends? That it becomes for us a day of abundant life and joy and thanksgiving. That the Sabbath invites us to cease our relentless attention on ourselves and give ourselves over to God and to our neighbors. What if it's a day in which we shut down those electronic gadgets, and there are new ones every month, it seems like, that grab our attention, that rob us of our lives, that eat our time? What if we shut them down? And I'm honestly scared to think about that. What if we shut them down long enough to open the door so the Holy Spirit can come and enter into our lives and do God's work in us and let us experience the beauty of God's time? What if we as a community kept the Sabbath in such a way that we invited others into this place of rest and freedom and restoration? Together we could provide a place where people experience the joy and the freedom and the peace of God. Do you know that 4 times a year we welcome homeless families to spend a week in our church? Usually we have 4 families each week, 16 families throughout the year. Many of you volunteer to come and simply be with these families, do homework and play with the children, sit down and eat with them. Yes, we're practicing the hospitality of Jesus, which I often call the forgotten grace. But even more than that, we are inviting these neighbors into our space, into our time, so that they might experience Sabbath rest and God's time, where people are known and loved, not because of what they have or what they do or who they are, but simply because they are God's beloved children, created in the image of God. What if we were to keep the Sabbath in our worship, but also throughout the week when we provide a place of respite, rest, and renewal for those who are bullied in their schools, worn down by heavy burdens, broken by life's demands, ridiculed by the community because they are different from what other people think? What if we provide Sabbath rest, Sabbath renewal for those who are lost, driven by ambition, spiritually empty, out of balance, humorless, deprived of joy? You know, it doesn't take a PhD in physics to know that time is about more than the ticking of the clock. Sacred time, holy time, Sabbath time is about living every moment of our lives in God's time, in wonder, joy, peace, and freedom. Amen.